and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Ashleigh Early.
I'm Sue Singh.
And today I am so excited because we are joined by the amazing Daisy Chung. She is currently an account executive at Orum with over 5 years in individual and management roles in tech sales. Daisy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So I'll be honest, you were recommended to us because we put out a call on LinkedIn basically saying we don't have enough Asian Americans or Asians in general on the podcast. We're actively working to fix that. But B, we're really struggling to find women of Asian ancestry to come on the podcast. So I really genuinely want to say thank you for coming on. But also I'd love to just kind of start with, tell us a little bit about kind of your sales journey. I mean, you got over 5 years of experience. You're at Orum, which is a killer company. So tell us kind of how you got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the kind words. And I'm very excited to be here today. So funny story is I actually didn't choose to go into sales. I fell into it. So after I graduated college, came back to San Francisco, and I was actually looking for a job in HR. I knew I love people. I love traveling. I love that world. So that's what I was looking for. And I was looking for jobs. I was interviewing only for HR roles. Someone on LinkedIn actually reached out. It was my old manager at a company called Namely, where they're looking for their first sales hire in San Francisco. So he reached out for an interview, and I took that interview pretty much as practice for all my other interviews. I wasn't really thinking of taking the job. But during the interview, I was actually very impressed by the company itself, the management. I was also very intrigued about tech sales. Never had a quota, never thought about it. It wasn't something that I was very excited about, to be honest. But there was just something there that just kept pulling at me about the whole world of sales, about startup, about things like that I decided to pull the trigger and take the job. From then on, I fell in love. So within a couple of months, I did really well as a sales development rep. From there, I became a team lead. They asked me to move to New York, where eventually I went into management. And then from there, I decided to go the AE route to learn to close deals, because ultimately I realized you can't be the best manager possible if you don't try the role that all your reps are looking for. So all the SDRs wanted to be an AE. It was so hard for me to relate. So I decided the AE route's the route for me, at least for now, to see what that's all about. We were then just opening an office in Los Angeles. So then I picked up my bags, moved to Los Angeles, became an AE. And then from there, my manager at the time actually moved to a company called Orum. It's a startup that focuses on sales acceleration. And then I came on over, and so now I'm an AE there. So that's my whole sales journey.
That is quite impressive. It's funny how a lot of us just fall into sales, right? We never really think about what sales is. And especially for Asians, at least for me, I find that to be a lot with the culture itself. Is that something you feel as well?
Yeah, I would say so. To be honest, I don't even think my parents really fully understand what I do. I think it's definitely not something that I was ever coached or pushed towards. And when I was making my decision, I actually had an option between this new sales role at a startup and also a role at Facebook. And so my parents, everyone's pushed me towards Facebook, towards a more traditional job that doesn't focus on quotas or commissions or things like that. And despite that, I still went towards the sales route. And even now, 5, 6+ years later, I think it's still a very untraditional role in the sales world. People in Asian culture, they like stability. They like having status. They like something to be prestigious and to brag about, essentially. And I think sales is still something that's very unknown. There's still a specific stigma to sales that people don't really uncover unless you're in the world of sales.
Right. Isn't that true? There is a lot of stigma attached to sales, especially with the Asian culture and it not being our first choice of, what we want to do. Right. And how is, you being a woman, especially in Asian woman in sales, how is that? What has your experience been?
I think it's twofold. So one part of it is it's lonely in the sense that I don't see, I think almost any Asian. I've probably encountered maybe 1, 2, 3 tops in my entire career of Asian women in sales. And I've met hundreds, if not thousands, of sales professionals. So it's lonely in the sense where you don't see a lot of people that look like you, that have similar cultural background as you doing the role. The other piece of it is actually, I think, it's an advantage to help you stand out. So in a sales role, you're client facing, you're talking to a lot of people. And I think in a sense, an advantage I have is that because a lot of people don't look like me, I am a lot more memorable when I am selling or pitching a product. So I try to take away the, I guess, feeling of being by myself in this role and not having many people look like me, but actually use that to your advantage as a way to kind of show the world, despite race, despite sex, all these things, what you can bring to the table. And that's one of the pieces I love about sales. It is focused on results. It's focused on what you bring to the table. It's focused on how you consult your clients, and race, age, sex, all that's kind of taken away in a sense.
It's interesting you bring that up because we hear that a lot, especially when we've heard that a lot. I've heard that a lot in my career from the perspective of, oh, well, sales is the one business role where there isn't really sexism and there isn't really racism. And they try and say it's all down to numbers. And in that way is really great, because when all things are created equal, it really is just down to the numbers. The problem we know is things aren't created equal. I'm kind of curious your perspective here, because I know if we talk to, and we have talked to people from the Black community or from the LGBTQ community or any other of these like minority communities, they say, they talk about their experience about how there are certain companies that the doors will never open to them or something like that. I'm curious, what do you think kind of that split is like? Do you think most of the valley is open to you? If we're talking Silicon Valley, most of tech would be open to you. Do you think there are some doors that are shut? And what does that look like for kind of the state of Asian women in sales?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think when you enter the industry, it is hard if you don't have any experience, and that's where the barriers of race, sex, all those things can come in. But once you're in, the results are then that's obvious. That gives you an advantage to leverage when you interview at other places, because you have those numbers to back you up. And so I think in one sense, it's more equal in terms of what you earn, because what you earn is what you close or what meetings you book, what you bring in. Nobody can take that away from you if you are booking those meetings or closing those deals. But I guess the other aspect that can be seen unfair, or there's some bias to it, is the route towards management, or the route towards maybe when getting territories split up, or all these different things. There can be an aspect of other factors factored in because of your culture, because of your sex, whether it's an intentional or unintentional. I think a lot of times there are unintentional biases that happen in the workplace. Yeah, and that can come into play because of your race, because of your sex, or even because of your age, whether or not you're ready for that next role or that bigger territory or things like that.
Has that happened to you though?
Personally, it hasn't. I'd say because I think I launched my sales career pretty quickly, where my results were very obvious that first month, second month, year. I was breaking records pretty much every year I was in sales. So I was given I shouldn't say I was given the opportunity. I guess I earned it in a sense. I earned it, that you get that I guess reputation that follows when you do really well, and from there the doors do open. So I do admit that I feel like very blessed in that sense, that I was able to launch my sales career really quickly. I was able to get noticed because of my hard work, because I learned and picked up the skills quickly to just shine and have that continue in my career trajectory.
So I'm curious, you had this great opportunity, you took full advantage of it, you came in, you kicked ass, you took names. One of the places, like you even mentioned, where there can be a lot of this kind of bias, and I think based on some of the other conversations we've had, there can be more friction between kind of the Asian culture and the traditional kind of B2B culture, is getting that promotion and what that promotion track looks like and what it takes to get there. So I'm curious, were there any moments where you kind of had to change how you had to go against what your instincts were, or what you felt like you were culturally used to? Or is there anything or were you able to change the circumstances to be accommodating to what you were comfortable with?
Yeah, I think that's the piece that's not just pure metrics driven. I think that was definitely hard from the beginning. A lot of part of the Asian culture is to stay a little more on the quiet side. We are taught when we're growing up to not brag about yourself, to not show off anything, to just be humble, to follow the rules, to stay quiet, to not be on anyone's alert level. That's the type of the culture I was brought up with. And so I think a lot of times in SaaS and tech and corporate America, you kind of have to be talking about yourself and showing off in a sense to get that promotion or to get noticed. And a lot of times, when you do good work behind the scenes, that's not just your numbers, it's when you're helping others out, when you're doing things that will help out organize the CRM, whatever the case is, it doesn't go noticed unless you talk about it or find a way to share that upwards. And so that was something that I did struggle with a lot, is how to show your work outside the results without really vocalizing. And I know a lot of times in meetings too, a lot of times it's participating, it's vocalizing your ideas, it's having a stand the table. And these are the things, again, I was not used to. I was used to just being quiet, just agreeing, just nodding my head. And so slowly, through noticing how the corporate American sales world operates, it's very different from my own culture, is when I started picking up year 1, year 2, the things you do need to do to get ahead in your career. And so as it progressed, I think this is one of the main reasons that we don't see enough Asian Americans in sales. I think 1, it's because of the stigma tied to it, but 2, I think it's the education piece. I think a lot of people, especially Asian Americans, don't really understand tech sales, don't understand what the role is, what it can do for you, and how it's not just the stigmatized, you have to be very extroverted as a specific, white male is what we see a lot in sales. It's not just that. And I think it's education and kind of warming up, opening the doors for others to see that, for others to start participating, considering a role in sales.
I know it's interesting. You're spot on. You talk about the stigma and how, like, I think if you asked 100 kids today, describe a salesperson, they describe Tom Brady, basically, right?
Yeah.
Tall, white, confident, reasonably eloquent. And that's
funny.
Yeah, all that stuff. So you mentioned something really interesting there around kind of Asian culture specifically. And we've heard this repeatedly, that one of the foundations in Asian culture is kind of listening first, not standing out, not drawing attention to yourself. What I'm really interested in is kind of this idea that, there is the stereotype of the tiger mom and the really aggressive, shall we say, parents in a lot of Asian cultures, and the, go be a doctor, go be a lawyer. It's interesting because you mentioned specifically in the intro, the desire for prestige and for accolades and for recognition. And it kind of cracks me up, because sales, I feel like that's a lot of what corporate sales is. It's get to President's Club, close this $1 million deal. And if we could communicate that to some of the parents, it's like, no, you don't understand. I'm the top 1%. Like, how many doctors can say that? Psh, how many doctors are closing X million annually, or are working with this many blue chip stock companies? But no one talks like that other than Grant Cardone, or people like that. It's an interesting dichotomy to crave that prestige and that recognition, pick an industry that gives it out like mad, not necessarily in a healthy way, but that's not making the transition back to our families. And I'm laughing because, like, my father is a salesperson. I was raised by a salesperson. I'm in the same boat as you. I don't think he even completely understands what I do these days either.
Yeah.
Because what he did was completely different from what I do. So I can only imagine what someone outside of the space goes through. And I'm just kind of curious. I don't know if I'm on the right track, if you think that's crazy, or I don't, and more than anything, how do we fix it? Because we got to get more people in. We got to get more people moving up.
No, and you're spot on. You're spot on, Ashleigh. I think that it's education. It's even when the older generation, they see it. I'm talking about my family specifically. Like I've told them, like, hey, I've done this. I broke records. I made top rep of the year, and it just goes through their ears, and they're bragging about all these other people that are, in prestigious roles in engineering or finance or working for big corporate companies. And I think no matter what I say, they still don't really click hand in hand. And I think it comes down to education and time, because it's a different generation of thinking of things. But I think with more time and decades to come, as people can see what tech sales is, and I'm not even talking about parents, I'm saying even people in our generation, a lot of people, tech sales goes unnoticed. Like, people don't go to college going, hey, when I graduate, I want to get into tech sales. I want to join sales. Everyone's like, I want to be an investment banker. I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer.
Or an entrepreneur. Whatever they think that means.
Exactly. We hear all those things, but never once does someone go, when I grow up or when I graduate college, I'm getting into sales. And so I think it's education.
Nobody wants their kids either to go into sales, right? Not you. I mean, you go to like 10 different salespeople and you say, hey, would you want your kids to go into sales? 7 out of 10 would say no.
Yep. And it's because of the stigma tied to it. And I think, as you guys know, there's a whole LinkedIn world of all these sales professionals and all these sales influencers. And we all know what like the sales hype is. But I think it's because it's in our own community. There's not enough light shed to people not in sales. If you're in sales, you get it. But you're not in sales, you don't really get the unlimited pay potential. You don't get the skills you learn or skills you can apply to other things in life. It's kind of part of your life, your communication style, how you work with people, how you build relationship. There's so many things I think that just kept within the sales world and not yet expanded outwardly, where it becomes more prestigious. It's only prestigious to ourselves because we know it so well.
Yep. I mean, it's not considered a profession yet. It's still a job. So
it's not outside the community, which is ridiculous.
I do believe, I think with time, I see even people like my own close friend community, they will ask me questions about it. They're starting to see like why I love my job so much, why I've done this for 5-6 years. I think it really does start with a ripple effect of you impacting and sharing with other people not in sales. And in turn, it's going to create a bigger and bigger bubble so people are more aware. And that's why as an Asian American, I'm very proud, very happy in my role, what I do, because I want to show other Asian American women specifically what this role can do for them. And I feel like if there's not enough people doing it, then there won't be enough interest or questions about it.
So let me ask you a question then. What is it about your background as an Asian American woman that you think has made you, or is there anything, I assume there is, that's made you a better saleswoman?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Ashleigh. I think there's bits and pieces to part of the, stigma to being Asian American woman or Asian American in general. I was raised by someone you would call, quote unquote, a tiger mom, someone who expects nothing but the best, someone who will push you further and further. Just like all the stereotypes you probably have heard of, coming home with an A and they're expecting an A plus, coming home with.
I'm laughing because I hear that and I'm like, I can so see a tiger mom going crazy on a Salesforce, like, you're 99% quota. Why aren't you at 100% quota? What do you mean you're only at 100%? Why aren't you at 110? Like, this is such the perfect job for a tiger mom to like push someone for. It's really fascinating to me, that disconnect. But
yeah, and I guess in that way, I'd be very scared. I don't think there should be tiger moms in sales because I feel bad for that sales rep. They already have enough with their management and their team. Now they have their mom and dad.
Okay, fair point. Very fair point there.
Yeah, I would actually be very frightful for that. But I get what you're saying. I think there's a lot of synergy and there's a lot of like, trying your best, doing your best in the role that I got growing up. To me, it's about, doing really good and going above and beyond, but also just doing the best you got and pushing yourself. A lot of think it goes both hands. I think in Asian culture is one, always going, better and better, but also like you're competing with yourself a lot. And I think that goes into what brought me into sales and where I became good at it is at a certain point, it is about competing with yourself and being happy and proud of you being better than the day before, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not just results related. I think it's also like as a person, your communication style, your rapport building, your organizational skills. We all know all the fun things that goes into sales.
Right. And one more thing I wanted to check with you, like, we Asians, like, our emphasis is a lot on learning, right? We take education really, really seriously. How do you think that
For the record,
figured?
says the woman with 2 master's degrees over here. For those of you who don't know, Sue has 2 masters.
Yep.
Oh, that's
So,
crazy. Yeah.
So my question was, how do you think that played into your career in sales, having that, you know, the Asian culture, which emphasizes so much on education, and putting that in sales, has that influenced your career at all?
I say it has, in the sense that Asian culture is all about learning and growing. That's why education is so important. And then to backtrack a little bit of that, I think where the education became so important in Asian culture is because, like, my parents specifically, and a lot of Asian American children who have parents of immigrants, they came from countries where education was taken away from them, which is why education has always been so important to specific Asian cultures, because they know that's what they need to excel and do well in life. And because they didn't have that growing up, that's taken away. I know that's why there's such a huge emphasis. And with that, growing up, that was instilled to me that education is very important. You should always learn. There's always more to learn. If you know everything, there is a problem. And so that is the mindset I was instilled with growing up. And so bringing that into sales, I think, has definitely helped me a lot in terms of having a very curious mind. From day one of my job first in sales, I think you can ask my colleagues, I had probably a million questions. The next day, probably 99,000 questions. And every day they're just questions after questions. And it's just that curiosity and that push to learn and educate on all the different aspects, product related, objection handling related. There's so many things you can learn that gets you better and better in your role. So I do say that education has a lot to opening up your mind and just asking questions and learning about it.
It's really interesting to me you bring that up, because there's actually been, I was reading this last year when we did the state of sales survey. Interestingly enough, the highest educated group across all races are first generation children of immigrants. And so in my own family, my mother's side, my mother is first generation. Neither of her parents, same thing. Neither of her parents were able to get college degrees because that was taken away because they were in the European theater of World War II. So all 3 of their kids, my mother and her 2 siblings, all ended up with nursing or doctor degrees. And they're in a culture where it sounds like very similar to Asian culture, this particular branch of Christianity. I'm not kidding. And anyone who is familiar with Seventh-day Adventists knows this. Pretty much everyone goes into medicine, doctor, nurse, dentist, or law. It's crazy rare that someone goes outside of it, or at least it has been for the past 20 years. Just to give you an idea, of my 9 cousins, there are 2 of us who are not in medicine. We're the weird ones, and we're also the oldest ones. Go figure out. Take from that what you will. But it's really interesting, the idea that education was taken away, and so it became so important as understanding that how much it opens doors. But I think one of the things that, I think you're spot on with curiosity. What's really interesting to me, though, is I'm noticing more and more is I think some sales reps are falling into this trap of education stops when you get the job. Or education only happens during onboarding, where your sales education really needs to be something that's constantly happening. And that's something that's very, I think, feels very unnatural, or feels like a point of weakness in, if I could say, white culture. There's definitely a stigma around constantly taking classes or educating yourself or doing things to make yourself better that aren't like working out or meditation. I'm curious, does that same kind of stigma exist in Asian culture, or is there nothing around like taking more classes or webinars or certifications or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that stigma and push is definitely there when you're growing up. So as a kid and all the way up until college, you are pushed to take a lot of extra courses, take a lot of extracurriculars, always learn, always expand your mind, because I think it goes back into that's what our parents did not have growing up. And that's why they're instilling all this so their children can have a better future. And I think after you graduate college, there is a little bit of freedom where you're no longer bind to that way of growing up. I think it's always gonna be a part of you because that's your whole 18, 20 years of growing up. But you do have that freedom to decide post that era of what to do. And I think a lot of that still sticks with you. And that's why unconsciously that I'm always here to learn, always asking questions, because that's what I had growing up. And so I think what I'm realizing too is I think even the Asian American who have a lot of freedom now after they grow up, they make their own decisions. They're not pressured to have this type of way of growing up as they did. A lot of things they were taught or put into as a child still stays with them unconsciously because that's how they grew up. And so I think because of the way Asians grew up of having to do all these different things, having to balance their life, having to always learn, and having that pressure to always do well, it kind of sticks with you after, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah, it's meant to be, right? Like you have to do it. You don't have a choice. Like it's not like why are you not doing it? It's like you don't have a choice. You just have to do those extra courses. You have to keep learning. And the same thing, like, and I think it's also about in the mind, like as an Asian woman, myself in sales, I keep thinking like, I don't have this certificate. I don't have this, like, what do I need to do to progress? It's never like, do I go into a job? My first thought would be like, hey, what do I need to learn before I can jump in and try to do something?
Well, honestly, that it sounds kind of like there was that study that was done that found, and is now being contested, but has been talked about a lot. Looking at men versus women when they look at job descriptions, men will apply to a job when they hit 50% of the job requirements. Women will only apply when they hit 100%. So it's interesting to hear kind of that compounded layer of one, okay, I got to make sure I hit everything, but then two, what do I need to learn to make sure that's something that that's not something that I would even think of when I'm looking at a job description is what do I need to learn? I'd be thinking, do I have it or not? So it's that idea of kind of, it sounds like it's almost kind of, I don't know if you can like brainwash someone into lifelong learning or like, I don't know that's oversimplifying and probably not fair, but it's interesting too to hear that it's almost subconscious for both of you now. It's like, no, okay, I didn't have that, but now I'm doing it without realizing I'm doing it.
Yeah, and it kind of becomes who you are, and it takes some unlearning if you want. Fortunately for me, I actually learned to really love to learn. That's actually something I enjoy, but I know it's not for everyone, and it's important to unlearn some of the things you're taught growing up if that doesn't feel like who you are, who you're meant to be.
Can you share any examples of what that might, what some of those things you had to unlearn were, especially in relation to like your sales career?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the concept of comparison. In Asian culture, comparison is really big, where you're always constantly compared to other people, other things. Why, that's where you get that competitive edge of like, how can you be better and better? And so that was definitely something I unlearned growing up, because ultimately comparison is not going to do anyone any good. You can't be competitive, but it takes away a lot of your happiness and takes away a lot of I guess your self-worth, and it gives you this added pressure as if you're not good enough and you're always not enough. And so realizing that as I got older, especially in sales, that's why I love competing with myself, because it's still that competitive feeling. But when you're competing with yourself, you're constantly improving and getting better, and there's like a happiness tied to it. Versus if you're looking at yourself and you're looking to other people's numbers and other people, what they're doing in their pipeline, it's just additional stress. It takes away your self-worth. And I don't think that's what life or sales is about. And so the thought of comparing to others is something I definitely had to chip away at and realize and unlearn over the years, so that I can be happy and motivated. And that actually propels you to do even better, at least for me personally, when you take away that perspective of comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you can hit the nail on the head there. Like comparison is innate almost. Like, you always told, hey, look at, especially as a kid, make friends with it. You always told, make friends, go sit with the guy who's like top of the class.
Yeah, go learn from him. What can you learn from him?
Yeah, see so-and-so's kid, like this uncle's kid, see they're they're learning this and they're doing this and doing that. And some point of time, I don't know if you felt this ever, but personally, I have felt like, hey, I wish I was more driven than what I am. I always, uh, feel like, hey, I wish I'd done this instead. I wish I'd done that instead. That kind of pushes me to be more driven. And also the fact that, I know you touched upon this earlier on, is being able to talk about yourself is super, super difficult. Like, especially even for me, I'm like, you ask me to write my resume, I'd be like, okay. I mean, Ashleigh asked me to give her like a 5-line bio, and I had to be like, okay.
I think it took about 6 weeks to finally get me your bio.
So, how did you get over that?
Yeah, I think very similarly. I used to like cringe when people ask, like, write down your bio, and where you pretty much have to list out all the bragging points about yourself. And then I reread it over and over again. I'm like, does this sound too much? Like, I don't like how this sounds. I don't like how this looks. But essentially, I would just look up other people who have written bios, and people that I admire or look up to, and other people who put themselves out there in a light that I personally respect. And from there, I kind of read how they verbalize things, where it is talking about themselves, but in a way that you feel very connected. It doesn't feel like they're bragging. It feels like you're learning, or it's a whole story about it. And I start learning to pick up pieces about how to convey this in a way that just doesn't feel like bragging. So I think pulling from different pieces that inspire you and then convey in that sense, and just reiterating on better and better. Even if you're cringing on the inside, you have to keep reiterating to eventually feel comfortable. I think that is also the beauty of sales, of picking up the phone and getting rejected one too many times, but you're reiterating on your talk track until you're better and better, and it's less cringeworthy for you to be fully happy with. So again, this just ties into how I think a lot of things you do in sales can attribute to a lot of things in life outside of sales, which is why I am so passionate of other Asian American women or other people of minorities to consider a role in sales, because these are the things that, innately we're taught to be scared of or cringeworthy, or not put ourselves out there. But the role of sales slowly but surely teaches us how to do that in real life. And that's why I'm just so passionate, and I wish like more and more people will consider or learn more about sales, so that it can help them in life outside of sales.
Okay, so now I have to ask the question, and I'm going to kind of ask this to both of you, because I think this applies to both of your experiences. What can those of us who believe in diversity of thought, to believe in diversity of backgrounds, in hiring roles in sales, especially entry-level sales, do to communicate to your community that this is a viable option and something that's worthy of being considered for their career? And it is a career. We're working on that. But what can we do to what can we do to reach out to you 5 years ago today?
For me, seeing examples of people already there and showcasing them would make more sense than people just talking. Because any talk would just be talk. It would seem like fluff, honestly. If you really think that you need Asian women in sales, look around. I'm sure you can't be like, I don't have anyone in sales that I don't know, right? There's bound to be that 1 or 2 or 3 people. I mean, showcase them, show us that you think they're worthy.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Sue. I think growing up, because there weren't many Asian American women in sales, you never really thought or considered this a career or a job or anything, because you don't see people that are similar to you. I think it does start at a young age. And I think if there are more university recruiters out there in college campuses, out there in community colleges, out there in the community, just educating about tech sales, and if some of those educators can be people of color, that will add more relatability between the applicants and the recruiters, so that more people are interested. But I think it is education and role models that will get more and more people open and interested in this path of sales.
Oh, that's brilliant. Daisy, thank you so much for being so open with your experiences. And Sue, thank you for chiming in as well. I know I put you on the spot a bit. As we wrap up this episode, we're going to wrap it up the same way we always do, with a series of rapid fire questions. Nothing too heavy. Give us your first thoughts, Daisy, that we affectionately call the lightning round. Starting off with, what's your morning routine?
Wake up, stretch, brush my teeth, and put on some perfume.
Pick one person who's had a significant impact on your career.
I'll have to choose my mom.
I love that. All right. What's your pump up song?
Oh man, I would have to choose Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus.
Oh my gosh.
Love that song.
What's the one thing you'd wished you'd learned earlier?
One thing I wish I learned earlier would be to be patient with myself.
What's your favorite sales book?
It's not a sales book, but it's a book talking about like wealth and bettering yourself. It's Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Oh my gosh, that is a flashback. I read that when I was like 15.
It's a classic.
That is a classic.
It's one of my favorites.
What's one way someone could have been a better ally to you?
By listening, just listening and understanding and just being quiet and letting you talk is always a good way to be an ally.
What's one way you're working to be a better ally to others?
Listening as well. I think you can always be a better listener, just shutting up, listen to what the other person has to say, and just really deep listening.
Yeah. And what's your guilty pleasure after a bad day?
Probably going to sleep with no alarm. So just ignoring everything on my phone, turning it off, and just closing my eyes.
That is absolutely a guilty pleasure. Daisy, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure. Where can people connect with you? Where can they find out more about you and more about Orum?
I'm on LinkedIn, so they can add me on LinkedIn, Daisy Chung 13. I also have a YouTube channel I'm growing about tech sales. They can find me there as well, Daisy Chung. And
we'll put all the links in the show notes.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, dear listener, for listening to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. As usual, please do be a huge help in supporting the show if you can like, subscribe, follow, and leave a review on your podcast catcher of choice. Don't forget to check out our newly revitalized LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter feeds. Got lots of great stuff going on there, from inspiration to stories around visibility, and a bunch of stuff coming in the next couple months around webinars and some special stuff for some big months that are coming up. So make sure to like, follow, subscribe. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. We will see you next time.